Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. Now I never thought I'd start a video on this channel about wargaming showing you the sink and me doing the washing up, but here we are. This video is all about prepping the Forgeworld Reaver Titan for assembly and painting, and it really does start in a sink or a bath or a bucket in the garden or some big receptacle for water that you can do what I'm showing here. I really can't overstate how important it is to wash all the resin on a model like this, or indeed any Forgeworld model. So you've seen there, I've got the bags exactly as they came with the model. I've put water inside them, squirted some fairy liquid, some extra in there, filled them up with water and left them in the sort of sink like this for a couple of hours. Now this is lukewarm water, it is not hot because you can start warping the resin. And you can see here, like kind of every half an hour or so I went in, turned all the parts around, just making sure they're getting fully soaked in there, and really did leave them to thoroughly soak. After a couple of hours, drained the water out, refilled it again with fresh water and got to scrubbing. So why am I doing this? Well, when you get models from Forgeworld or any resin model from any company really, although Forgeworld do seem to be worse for it than some others. It comes with mould release agent. Now that is agent they put into those moulds so that the resin pops out easily when the model's finished. Now that leaves a residue on the models, and that residue is awful for stopping paint sticking and those kind of things. So if you don't clean it off, what you'll find is you'll get to the painting stage or you'll spray it or whatever and paint just will not stick. Now not a problem as such if you're doing a real small model like a 28mm scale one, because you can clean up that little area. However, if you have this happen on a big resin model, it's a massive problem. So it is well worth doing what I'm showing you here. Now you could do this in a bucket, you could do it in a sink like I'm doing here, you could do it in a bath, it really doesn't matter, but make sure you do it. Soak it for a few hours like I said before, and then go to town with the toothbrush. I'm taking every single part you can see here and scrubbing it thoroughly down right across all the models, putting it back into the original bags it comes in. And you can see here doing like a final rinse stage. So they were on the side and the water was draining out, but it wasn't quite coming out as well as I wanted to. So quick flush with water, cut the corner off the bag, leave it to stand so it fully drains and all the water is gone. Then leave it to dry for a little bit longer. You'll still see some little bits of water knocking around these models, but in this cleanup stage it doesn't matter. So after I've given it a thorough wash, this is when I'm starting to clipper off and clean up the gates and things. Now you might ask, why not do this clean up first and clipper everything off and then wash? Because then you'd be putting less things into your sink or whatever. But if you do that, you will end up getting that mold release agent all over your hands, all over your tools, all over your table. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but if you've watched my unboxing video of this, my hands were getting really greasy really quick, and that was only just sort of touching them to turn around and look at them. So well worth doing in that order. Now again, everything I ever say on this channel, take it with a pinch of salt. It's all my own personal opinions, and someone else might tell you it's far better to chop all the bits off first. This is just my experience. And again, I've said this is the biggest resin model I've ever done. I have done several Warhound Titans in my past. I've done some of the other bigger Forgeworld vehicles and knights and things, but never something this large. But the techniques really do show across. So all I'm doing here now really is with a set of clippers and a hobby knife, and I'm going around with the model, clipping off all the big bits of flash, all the gates, all the sprues, and then going around really and cleaning up any mould lines you can see there. And these models are plastered with mould lines. Another thing, just a bit of a quality check as you go around, making sure you're happy with how it is. So you'll see here a couple of bubbles where there should be rivets, and obviously an air bubble's got stuck in, a couple of air bubbles on the back of the piece there. Now the reason to inspect and check these is if there's any really big awful patches, one, you can send them part back for replacement if it's that bad. Two, it sort of sets in your mind what you've got to do when you go after the build stage. Now, one thing I'm noticing when I'm checking, you see here there's different colours in the resin. Now this is where the resin hasn't really set. I don't know if you can see, but I'm pushing a hobby knife into those resin parts. The real dark grey resin is really quite solid. The white patches, where they've obviously mixed it incorrectly or something, is a lot softer. So where it's really super soft, I'm just popping the end of a knife in and carving it out. There's probably no need to do that. But I get a little bit paranoid because sometimes on those patches, again, paint won't stick. It doesn't react correctly. Now, if this is an Imperial model, I'd then go and fill the gap in. But because this is going to be Nurgled, turn to Nurgle for my Death Guard and Nurgle army eventually, I've just chopped it out and I can leave it a little crater in the armour, and it's going to look like battle damage or wear, you know, for the centuries. So really, I'm at this stage going around and taking as many mould lines off as it's practical to do at this stage. I will do another clean-up later on when it comes to assembly. But really, this is a first stage clean-up, taking all the big stuff off, going anything that stands out as obvious. Certain little parts might not stand out to you at this point, because until you start piecing the parts together at assembly stage, you might not realise that something's not quite in the right place. But This is about stage one, getting it done as much as humanly possible. Now you will find a lot of these areas around the model where there will be excess resin in gaps and cracks like this, in areas that should be completely free of it. This is just a part of the production. You're going to end up with these sections like that to carve down. Now there were a few times when I'm cutting models up and I'm slicing pins off, whatever, that I wasn't 100% sure what the part should actually look like. So when you're doing this, it is worth having the build guide to one side so you can be really sure. Now, the vast majority of parts will be, you'll be able to clean them up with clippers and a hobby knife, but there are some bigger chunks where you've got massive, thick gates of resin like this that you will not be able to do with a set of clippers. So here's where a hobby saw comes in. Now, this is just a cheap hobby saw I picked up from a DIY shop for about £3, nothing massive, and really just take your time, gently saw it. Obviously I've done it in super speed, wish you could do it that fast in real life. Now when you are doing this, this will create a lot of resin dust and a lot of things, so a well ventilated room and wear a mask, because resin dust is not very nice. Now if you're careful with it, and if what you do is you just wet the blade of your saw slightly, it will keep down some of that dust and it won't chuck the finer particles in the air if you keep every now and then just wetting the blade of the saw, but you will get some particles knocking around. You can see some are generating onto my hands, some bigger chunks on the table. Now these big chunks are not what you're worried about, that sort of, will drop onto your table. It's the smaller, finer particles. So you can do it by keeping the blade wet, but again, well ventilated area, wear a mask because you don't want to be breathing these things in. Now what I found with the Reaver, there's not too many parts that you need to deploy a saw. Really it's these two top sections of the carapace, the big thick chunky parts. So you will need a saw, but not for too long. You see here, just cleaning the saw down when I'm finished. Now one bit of a tip I give when you are doing this cleanup, especially if you're not going to do a big session, even if you are going to do a big session, to be honest, after you've done a certain amount, maybe 1 or 2 bags, you will have generated a lot of particles, a lot of dust, those kind of things, and it is worth cleaning up as you go, because otherwise you're going to lean on your table, it's going to get on your arms, onto your hands. Certain people might react to resin particles, some do. I'm lucky enough that I don't, so I don't need to protect my hands necessarily. Some people do, but even though I don't tend to react to resin and things, I do clean it up in between 1 or 2 bags. I'll give it a good clean down the table, not just the mat I'm cutting on, but the whole table that I work on, just to make sure none of this is knocking around, because it's not overly pleasant stuff. So you can see here again, I've made a mess of the table again, but there we go. One thing to watch out for as you're going around, I don't know if you can see what I've picked out there, that is a tiny bit of the actual mould that Forgeworld used to make this model. You will find bits of that stuck around in places, because obviously these moulds wear out as they're doing the casting. Just make sure you do pick that out as well, because that does not react well to the paints, or doesn't react in the same way as the kind of resin does. So really just a good cleanup. Here's another example I'm talking about of the mixing and quality of the resin. So I'm just testing it with a knife. Most of these bits are actually nearly as solid as the normal resin, so I don't feel the need to dig it out. But I did find a chunk just along the side here where the resin was so soft, the knife literally slid in with virtually no effort put in. So, this is a genuine Forgeworld model I spent a lot of money on. Could be argued that these quality issues should not be on a model of this sort of size and calibre, but they are. That's just the world we live in. So it's worth checking and making sure you are happy enough. Now I'm just showing you those pieces there, because some of the pieces, especially the smaller ones, the ones that are going to be support struts and things like that, I left on the gates, because I thought if I cut these off, they're going to go 1, catapulting across the room, 2, it keeps them together for later on. So I didn't feel the need to remove all of them, but the vast majority of pieces you can see there, I have sliced off the gates and sprues and cleaning up as we go. Now this is the grill that is going to go on the top carapace over some of the workings of the Titan. Just giving that a clean up, slicing down into the gaps between these vents, and it's a really nice little piece. Now what I'd say overall, I didn't find too many miscast pieces. There was a fair few little bits of weirdness to work out, but it wasn't too bad. And I was left at the end with a massive block of resin, lots of spare parts. They're just short on how much waste resin there was, around 1 kilo of waste resin. So a good clean up, a lot of waste left. Again, cleaned it all thoroughly up and had the parts all laid out in front of me. And then this is something I do again on big Forgeworld builds, is I take the instructions and I build myself almost Lego bags. So I go through the instructions and check I've got all the parts. So taking the top thigh parts there, the mid thigh parts, then moving into the feet, etc. And I go through each page of the build guide and I build myself a separate bag for each of these stages. And in that way, one, you're doing another quality check of the parts, making sure you're happy, making sure they match each other. But two, then you know you've got all the parts for your model. So you're not getting to the build stage, you know, it could be weeks and weeks later, it could be months and months later that you get to the build stage and go, oh, I'm missing parts. Whereas if you do this fairly quickly, you clean the model up when you're excited that you've just bought it, and then you do this bagging process, check all the pieces. Even if you do leave it for months, you know you've got a full, complete model that you don't have to worry about. Whereas finding later on that you're missing a couple of parts, you know, chasing Forgeworld after you've owned the model for 6 months might be an issue. And to be honest, when you've just bought a big model, you want to get playing with it, you want to do something with it. And this stage isn't over time consuming. It probably took actual physical work after you'd soaked the model, a couple of hours of cleanup, a couple more hours of then chopping all the pieces out, and then maybe 20 minutes or so building the bag. So a few hours of investment with a brand new model I think is always worth it, and it's just that bit of fun and a chance to really test and check all the pieces so that when you later on go reading the build guides, you've got experience of what all these parts are because they've been in your hands a couple of times by now, and it definitely for me helps familiarise myself with the model. So there we go, that's really my thoughts. Strange video, but I just thought it's important to look at how we wash, we prep, etc. with the models. And there's going to be plenty of videos coming out in fairly quick succession about this Reaver Titan. So hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully I will see you on another video.